Hey guys, it's CodingBoy56 back at it with a new video. I know I haven't exactly uploaded in 4, 5, or maybe even 6 months now, but I promise that's going to change from now on. Anyways, for those of you who are new to my channel, I'm starting a new beginners series on how to use the Ev3 software from the bottom up. And the reason for this is I've noticed that a lot of you guys are new to the software, and it might be useful to learn some of the fundamentals. So without further ado, this is episode 1 of Ev3 Fundamentals with CodingBoy56. Now the first thing we're going to do is start off by creating a new project. Let's name our project something memorable. In my case, I'm going to name it Lessons, because this is a project I'm going to use for all the upcoming tutorials. For now, let's name this current program Large Motor Test. Now, let's start off by dragging one of these large motor blocks. You see all of these different parameters up here, but the first and most important right now is the port. Now, you have 4 different options here, A through D, and what those correspond to are the different ports on the actual Ev3 brick. So for example, if you can see right there, yeah, you can see all of them, A through D, 4 different ports, and those allow you to connect to 4 different motors. So you just need to connect to the one that you're going to be using. In my case, I'm going to use B, that's fine, that's the default. You can also plug in wired, which we're going to talk about in a while, I'll be honest. It's going to take some time before we go into variables and arrays and things like that, and that's when wired is going to be more useful. But for now, just plug in B, and let's set our speed to 50, and plug in rotations as 1. I'm already connected to my Ev3 brick. I decided to skim past the connecting to an Ev3 bricks whole situation because there's a bunch of tutorials already like that, especially on the FLL tutorial site. So just press download and run. I'll do that in front of the screen so you guys can see. So you see that little pin I have over here? It's just going to show you how much one rotation is, even though it's pretty obvious. It's just going to, well, you'll see, 1 full rotation at 50 speed. Now, let's say I want to go at a slower speed. All you have to do is adjust this parameter. Let's make that 20. A shortcut for download and run is just Control R, which I'm going to do right now. Let me do that again in front of the camera. So as you can see, that was much slower. But what if I want to go in the opposite direction? All you have to do is type in a negative speed, and this will tell your motor to go in reverse. You guys can just play around with that, but let's look at this other parameter. Brake equals true. So all this means is that it's actually going to cut power and get to the exact amount of degrees that you want. 1 rotation is about 360 degrees, and if we look at our port input, it's exactly negative 361. Now the reason for that is because we were going at negative 20 speed, and we told it 1 rotation. So it would go a negative amount of degrees. Of course, it's going to be a little bit off because the Ev3 is not perfect. But let's say I set this to coast instead. Let's see what would happen. See how there was a bit of a delay when cutting the power to the motor? We can actually see this in the input over here because it's at 414 degrees. Which means that the Ev3 cut off power way too late. Now, in some cases, that's actually desirable, but the reason we usually use a brake is because it's much more accurate. Now, so far we've toggled with the on for rotations, on for degrees, but let's look at this on for seconds command. Now, what this on for seconds command tells your robot to do is just turn your motor on at your speed as usual, but instead of a degrees or rotations, you have 1 second. Which means your robot is turning this on for 1 second and then turning it off. So let's see what that looks like. That went on for 1 second, which at this speed makes your wheel turn negative 204 degrees, about. Let's say I made that, I don't know, 70. Let's see how fast that would go. So as you can see, it still went for 1 second, but because it's going at such a high speed, it completes much more distance. So in robotics competitions, we end up not using the second command, because if you end up wanting to change your speed, this is going to have a huge impact on the distance that your robot travels. So instead, we use degrees. Degrees are even better than rotations because they have a better resolution. For example, instead of typing in 1 or 2 or -1 for revolutions, you can type in 720, which converted to rotations would equal 2. Let's just see that in action again. And as you can see, it was pretty accurate for that kind of speed. Now, this works by using something called a PID algorithm to just tell the robot to stop at about 720 degrees. That's way ahead of where we want to be right now, but we'll get to it eventually. Just know that if you're using degrees or rotations, and you have this break command, it'll tell your robot to stop pretty close to the desired value. Whereas if you have coast, it'll just let your wheel spin until the program cuts off. Speaking of programs cutting off, let's see what happens if we just tell our robot to turn it on. As you can see, it did move quite a distance, but nothing really significant happened. As some of you might have thought, this is going to just run forever because you're telling it to go at 50% speed, but you're not giving it any kind of stopping condition or degrees. But the reality of it is, the program executes the start command, starting the program, and then just immediately goes to this large motor command, which tells the motor to go at 50% speed, but immediately cuts power because the program has ended. So you can't really use this without having some kind of block afterwards, such as a wait, loop, switch, or something else, but we'll go into that later as well. Now, on exactly how the robot knows to go a certain distance is based on an encoder. So the encoder is reporting this value to this input right over here, or port view, and it'll report to you the amount of degrees, rotations, or even current power. So the encoder is basically a kind of degree sensor, and it clicks whenever the motor is turned. These clicks correspond to degrees. So let's say I wanted to translate this into current power. Current power just tells you your robot how much power it's outputting is actually getting back. For example, if there's no resistance, right? There's no load. I'm not putting it on the ground. It's not lifting anything. If I tell it to go at 50% power, it should go at 50% power. Let me just demonstrate that for this 3-second program. Just pay attention to that number over here. If you looked at it, it was pretty close to 50 the entire time. Now let's say I put in some kind of load. I'm going to switch this over to the other sensor, the other motor, my bad, because I can actually hold onto this wheel. And I'll show you why that's important in just a second. So as you can see, I was holding onto that wheel, and if you paid attention to that bottom number over here, it was actually outputting much lower values than 50, because I was stopping the motor from turning. Now, you really shouldn't be doing what I just did, because it does damage your motor, but just be aware of the fact that the number that you put in over here doesn't always correspond to the output you get over here. It always depends on your load. So now that we've looked at the large motor block, let's look at some more complex functions. Let's look at this move tank function, for example. All this move tank function does is move your motors in opposite directions. This is similar to a tank because a tank only has 2 wheels, unlike your car, but it can also vary the amount of curve or steering it has. It can even turn on the spot by moving one motor forward and the other one backwards, and this will make the robot turn. So you can tell your motors which speed you want them to go at. So let's say I wanted to go at 20 and 70 speed, 20 being my left motor and 70 being my right motor, and this went for 1 rotation. I'm gonna run this program right now. So that was just a 50% difference between the motors. Let's make them go in opposite directions. Let's see what happens now. Now that we're done with this command, we can start by using move steering. Now, I almost never use this command because it's pretty much the same thing as a tank command, but worse. And by worse, I mean it's a lot more simple, but it doesn't give you the same amount of freedom as a tank command does. And the reason I say this is if I, for example, have the two commands side by side, a tank command allows you to vary the speeds exactly how much you need, whereas a steering command tells you how much to add or subtract from each motor. And you can see that cool symbol spinning around as I vary that number. This just tells your robot how much of a curve to apply to your wheels. So let's say I had it going at a 50% speed and I added a 25% value. So 25 would simply mean adding 25 to one motor and then subtracting 25 from another motor. Although I do believe that they multiply that by some value to scale it down. For example, if they multiplied it by 0.5, instead of adding and subtracting 25 to each one, it would just be a difference of 12.5. So that's pretty much all you really need to know about move tank commands, except the medium motor command. Yep, I forgot about that one. So the medium motor command is literally the same thing as a large motor command, except it allows you to manipulate the speed of a medium motor. Now, if you've noticed, they don't have a tanker steering option for a medium motor, and the reason for that is a medium motor has a much higher RPM than a large motor, but a large motor has more torque, meaning it can move a greater load. So you can't really use it to drive your robot, so there's no real point in making a tank and steering block just for the medium motor. Although you can actually send commands to a medium motor using a large command. I have seen it work in the past. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this week's lesson. Stay tuned for next time. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching that video. If you did, leave a like, and if you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing. And by the way, I wanted to know if you want to keep that intro and outro. I noticed that they're pretty long, and I just wanted to have your feedback on it. Just leave your feedback in the comment section down below. See you next time.